All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to Pastor's Point of View. Today is June the 4th. My goodness, this year's almost half over.
It is.
Can you believe that?
Well, I have to. Yeah.
Today is June the 4th, 2020. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor-teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. We're back with another Pastor's Point of View shows for you. I'm with, again, my good friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan. And Brother Jim, for lack of a better expression, I've entitled this Fast-Tracked into Globalism.
All right.
And I think really there's two prophetic signs that are huge all around us. The first is the rebirth of national Israel.
Right.
I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
Some would call that the super sign of the last days or the end times. And the second one, to my mind, is globalism.
Yeah.
You know, globalism is everywhere. So what we're going to talk about today in this show called Fast Track into Globalism, since globalism is such a big deal. And I don't think, a lot of ministries out there are focused on an issue. Like one ministry will be focused on education, one ministry will be focused on pro-life.
Yeah.
Another ministry will be focused on tracking apostasy in the church.
Yeah.
But what is to quote a Christian hymn, what is the tie that binds? The tie that binds that most people sometimes don't see the big picture. But the unifying theme that draws all of these little pieces together is globalism.
Yeah, that's right.
Or one worldism. And if you understand what the Bible says about globalism, suddenly the pieces of world events start making sense.
That's really true.
So what we're going to be talking about in Fast Tracked into Globalism is globalism in the Bible, past, present, and future. So here is our outline. Roman numeral 1, globalism past. Roman numeral 2, globalism present. Roman numeral 3, globalism future. And what we don't finish today, we're going to try to finish next week, Lord willing. But the fact of the matter is your Bible, folks, has a lot to say about this issue of globalism and one worldism. And let's start with globalism past. And to understand globalism past, you have to understand that the New World Order is not new.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of people think these calls that we have today by secularists, to get us into a New World Order or a one world government, they kind of act like it's some new idea. But it's actually an old idea.
Ancient.
It's as old as the plains of Shinar.
That's right.
Where they tried this experiment in Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. And most people know that story, just from Sunday school as kids, that when you read those verses, there was one language. The people after the flood were not spreading out like God told them to do.
Yeah.
In Genesis 9, verse 1, in Genesis 9, verse 7. And instead they, to quote those great theologians, Led Zeppelin, decided to build a stairway to heaven.
Yeah.
And they took over the institution of government that God gave humanity as a gift in the Noahic covenant, and they built a one-world project. Yeah. And that's the Tower of Babel. And essentially what it was is a one-world system of economics, politics, and religion that excludes God. And you can read it for yourself there in Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. And God apparently did not like what they were doing because he came and he confounded the language so the builders couldn't cooperate, and this one world project was stopped dead in its tracks.
Right.
And most people know that story fairly well. What they don't know is this quote from Josephus, a first century Jewish historian, in his Antiquities, comments on that story, and he comments on a man named Nimrod. Nimrod's mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
In Genesis 10, verses 8 through 10. He was the leader of this globalism, or this one worldism. His name in Hebrew literally means rebellion or revolt. And he is really the ultimate prefigurement or foreshadowing of the future Antichrist.
Yeah.
Because what Nimrod left incomplete, Satan's agenda is for the Antichrist to finish.
Yes.
But what does Josephus say about this famous historical account that we call the Tower of Babel?
All right, quoting here, he, that is Nimrod, persuaded them to attribute their prosperity not to God, but to their own valor, and little by little transformed the state of affairs into tyranny, holding that the only way to detach men from the fear of God was by making them continuously dependent upon His power. He threatened to have his revenge on God if he wished to inundate the earth again, for he would build a tower higher than the water could reach and avenge the destruction of their forefathers.
So this is amazing commentary on what
It
Nimrod
is.
was doing,
Yes.
going back to the first century, but he persuaded them, that's the global citizens, to attribute their prosperity not to God. Okay, so he wanted to create a situation where the world was dependent upon him,
Yeah.
Nimrod, not upon God. Notice this expression, little by little. So this was a gradual project that he implemented.
Yep.
You know, the old frog in the kettle story.
Yep.
And he transformed the state of affairs into tyranny. I want people to understand this. World government is tyrannical,
It has to be.
unless it's Jesus running the world government,
Yep.
which will happen in the millennium. But any other world leader other than Jesus will lead to abject tyranny. And he was trying to make mankind continuously dependent upon his power, Nimrod's. And then he wanted to build a tower so high into heaven that if God ever decided to flood the earth again, which he did in Genesis 7, that it would not have any effect on this kingdom that Nimrod was building.
That's some arrogance there, isn't it?
It sure is. And so what he was trying to do is build a whole society without God in it at all.
Yeah.
That was impervious from God's perspective, God's judgment, etc. And I think the key verse in all of it is Genesis 11, verse 6. What does that say?
All right, reading from the New American Standard 1995 edition, Genesis 11:6. The Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them."
In other words, if God let this continue, the potential for evil, when it says nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them, it's talking about the potential for evil.
Exactly, yeah.
The potential for evil is unlimited because there's no checks and balances against this system. If this system falls into the wrong hands, then there's no controls left to keep it in check.
Yeah.
And this is, the reason God disrupted this project is because of what it says in Genesis 8, verse 21, which is given in the same, post-flood context. Can you read just that underlined part? God here makes a tremendous statement about man's nature.
All right, this is from Genesis 8:21, and the phrase is, "The intent of man's heart is evil from his youth."
So human nature is fallen. That's why we need a Savior.
Well, Pastor, you mean everybody isn't basically good?
Not according to God. And it doesn't matter who runs this system, whether it's Nimrod or whoever, it's going to become corrupted.
That's right.
Because all human beings, with the exception of Jesus, who was virgin born, virgin conceived, other than him, all human beings have a corrupted nature.
That is
and
right.
it's the old statement from Lord Acton, who summed it up well when he said,
All power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
so what God did is he created nations. Nations serve as a check and balance. This chart here shows you that ever since the Tower of Babel, God's ordering of humanity is designed by him to be based on nations, not global governance. You see it in Acts 17, verse 26, where Paul makes his famous sermon on Mars Hill, and he makes a reference to this. What does he say there?
Acts 17:26, and he, talking about God, made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation.
So he says boundaries. First he says nation. Every nation of mankind.
Yeah.
Then he says the boundaries of their habitation. That kind of sounds like borders,
Exactly.
doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
And if you look at this slide here called the divine institutions, nationalism, which is what we're seeing come into existence in Genesis 11, is one of the 5 divine institutions.
Right.
These are all found in early Genesis. These are things that the Creator himself has built in to the fabric of fallen creation to sustain fallen creation.
Yes.
They're called divine institutions. The first is conscience. You see the scripture verses there in parenthesis. The second is marriage and the family. The third is labor. And, it's interesting in the Josephus quote, what he was trying to do was he was trying to make humanity, Nimrod was, dependent upon him. He was promising them what today is called a mincome, a minimal income, where the safety net turns into the hammock. And you don't have to go too far in our society to see that. Today you go to restaurants and there's not enough servers to help.
That's right.
Because a lot of people are staying home because they've got some kind of handout from the government.
That's true.
So we don't have enough workers.
That's very true.
So that's an attack on the institution of labor.
Yeah.
And then God gave the institution of government, Genesis 9, verses 6 and 7. And now the last one coming into existence is nationalism. So God is pro-nation, pro-nation state, pro-borders, pro-patriotism.
Yep.
Those are all things that God wants.
Yeah.
Because as long as you have several nations throughout the earth, it's hard for one person to get control of everything. And if one nation goes astray, as we saw with Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany,
Right.
other nations like the Allies can arise and oppose evil. But if you
Right.
don't have this check and balance system, if evil gets control of the only government that exists, the potential for evil is unlimited.
Yeah.
And that's why God confounded the language and did not want one world government.
Yeah. And it's very interesting looking at this slide that, we haven't seen Satan attack every one of these in our life here in the United States, have we?
Well, I guess you're being facetious because
Being a little facetious
every single one of them is an attack in the United States and probably worldwide.
Absolutely.
For that matter. So that is globalism, and you have to have that history lesson to understand the present
Right.
and what Satan wants to do in the future. So, you have anything you want to add to Globalism Past?
Just to reiterate what you said, God's intention initially was that there would be nations.
Yeah.
And then, of course, man wanted to go their own way.
Yep.
And we see the Tower of Babel come on the scene.
Yep.
God deals with that, right? And so things go along pretty well for a while with nations. And then we come to today, which we're going to talk about, I think, now, right?
Yes. Let's go into Roman numeral 2 here, Globalism Present. Dealing with past, present, and future. Taking a look here, number 2, present. Now, we know prophetically that globalism, one worldism, new world orderism will have its zenith or its heyday in the tribulation period.
Yes.
So following the rapture of the church, there's coming upon the earth a tribulation period, and that's where you're going to get the reincarnation of the Tower of Babel.
On steroids.
On steroids. And we are not in the tribulation period yet. The rapture hasn't happened yet.
Right.
But that doesn't mean Satan hasn't been working. He's extremely active,
Yes.
and he's setting the stage.
Yeah.
Here you'll notice a chessboard, and you can't just have a chess game out of the blue. Someone has to take the game out of the game box. Someone has to arrange the pieces on the different sides of the board. The players have to take their respective seats, and only when the stage is set properly do you know that a chess match is going to begin.
Yeah.
Well, that's how to understand human history. There is coming upon this world a chess match like you've never seen. But when it hits, and it will hit in that 7-year tribulation period, it's not just going to come into existence out of the clear blue.
Right.
The stage is going to be set in advance,
Right.
and if you're discerning, you can see the hand of Satan constantly moving to push humanity forward into his reincarnation of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
Something that frustrated him in Genesis 11, but God, in his providence, is going to allow Satan to complete that project one day.
Yeah.
And we know that Satan is at work today because of what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 2, verse 3 and verse 7.
All right, 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 7?
Yeah, sorry, I misspoke there. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 7.
All right, and here's what it says. The man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way.
I think for many years I missed this, Brother Jim. I knew verse 3, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist was coming. But I missed verse 7, where it says the mystery of lawlessness
Right.
is already at work.
Right.
In other words, before the man of lawlessness shows up, the mystery of lawlessness will be at work in the world, setting the stage for the man of lawlessness.
Exactly.
I mean, I would kind of put it this way.
Here's the mystery of lawlessness.
That's
right here.
That's right. I think you got it
The
upside
chess.
down.
Oh, let's get it upside down.
Yeah.
Okay. There.
That's the mystery of
Yeah,
lawlessness.
there it
That's
is.
the chessboard. And I would sort of put it this way, Brother Jim. By the time the Antichrist shows up, the wiring is going to be in place.
Exactly.
And all he has to do is throw the switch.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And it's not just Paul, and Paul said this 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
Satan was already setting the stage
Yes.
for the final drama. John says it in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 3. And what does that verse say?
1 John 4 and 3, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now it is already in the world.
So the Antichrist is coming. But even before the Antichrist comes, the spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world.
Yeah.
And there's your chessboard that
Yep.
you showed a couple of seconds
That's
ago.
right.
So how is, as we talk about globalism present, how is our world being set up for this one world government? I have a list of 7 things. Don't get the idea that this is exhaustive. I had to cut it down just for the sake of time. And you could go far deeper into many of these subjects. But to me, these are the main 7 as far as my own personal observation is concerned. So this is not an exhaustive list, but the first thing I have on my list here, Brother Jim, is global elite opinion. And when I talk about elites, I'm talking about the movers and the shakers, those at the very top. And it's interesting that the further you move up in any profession or occupation, whether it be banking, entertainment, politics, business, it seems like the further up you go on the ladder, the more the idea of global government is in vogue.
Yeah.
The rank and the file don't really see it that way, but the people at the top seem to.
Yeah.
And it's not conspiracy theories, it's reading comprehension ability.
Yeah.
Because I spend some time reading what these people say. And you'll notice what David Rockefeller says on page 405 of his memoirs. He was, I think he's dead now, but he was the quintessential globalist. And he just comes out and tells us what he wants to do.
Yeah, and as we look at these, I'm kind of thinking maybe these are the new mini Nimrods.
Yes.
Something to think about.
That's right.
Well, here's the quote. For more than a century, ideological extremists have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it.
Now,
Well, there it is.
close quote. Now, Brother Jim, you don't have to have some kind of secret knowledge to see what he wants to do. All you got to do is pull out his own memoirs.
There it is.
And read it there on page 405.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating quote because he says, some people think me and my family, people of great influence, in other words, are globalists rather than nationalists. Some people think that we pursue the interests of the globe before the interests of the nation. He says, well, if that's the charge, not only I'm guilty, but I'm proud of the charge.
Yeah. Give him a badge to wear. Right?
Yeah. And he probably hasn't read Genesis 11.
It's doubtful.
Because if he read it, he would see that he's working contra to one of the great institutions of God. So we're not dealing with conspiracy theories. We're dealing with reading published writings that anyone can access. And it's interesting that as these one-worlders get closer and closer to their goal, they get more and more transparent.
Yes, they do. That's right.
And I think if there's a mistake that we have made in history is we haven't taken people at their word.
Yeah.
You know, there was a guy that wrote a book called Mein Kampf, and it was dismissed out of hand as the writings of a lunatic. Mm-hmm. That man, of course, was Adolf Hitler, who went on to implement everything he said he was going to do in Mein Kampf. And think how different history could have been if his writings were taken seriously out of the gate.
Yeah.
And so this is what Rockefeller, is doing here. And it's hard to talk about this unless you talk about education. That's our second thing here. And there's a lot we could talk about with education. I just picked one quote from someone named Chester M. Pierce. He was a Harvard psychiatrist. Speaking as an expert in public education at the 1973 seminar, International Education Seminar, and I just picked this quote because it's foundational to what's happened to our educational system. All of these things that we are concerned about, Common Core and all these kinds of things, I mean, they're just the outworking of what is expressed in this quote. And we're not saying by reading this quote that there aren't good public school teachers out there.
Right.
What we're saying is they are locked in a system that to a very large extent handcuffs them.
Yes.
And tells them what they can say and what they can't say, what they can teach and what
That's
they
right.
can't teach. And the direction of our whole schooling system is bound up in this quote.
Yep.
And what does that say?
Well, let me make a quick comment, if I may.
Because you're married to a school teacher.
Well, I'm not only married to a school teacher, I myself am a state certified school teacher in Texas, and the date on this is 1973, so this came out right before I started going through teachers college. So now let's read it, shall we? Every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is mentally ill because he comes to school with certain allegiances to our founding fathers, towards our elected officials, towards his parents, toward a belief in a supernatural being, and toward the sovereignty of this nation as a separate entity. It's up to you as teachers to make all these sick children well by creating the international child of the future.
Would you say that's happened based on your experience?
I would say that's exactly what's going on.
In this quote, he says we've got a bunch of sick children under the age of 5. Now they're starting even earlier.
Yeah.
But what's wrong with these kids? Well, they love Jesus. They love mom and dad. And they love Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and the foundation of America. They're nationalists, in other words. So you teachers get out there and do your job and correct their thinking and transform them into globalists first, nationalists, family people, and Christians second.
Yeah.
Is that a right understanding?
Whew. Man, that's some scary stuff.
So there's our educational system. Let's go to number 3 here, just for the sake of time. And we're going to spend some time here because we've got some new data, such as what happened in 2020 related to this. But this is letter C. This is what's called crisis management. Crisis management, and you need to study the Reichstag fire
Yeah.
in Nazi Germany. It's the tool that the Nazis used to take control. And essentially what the Nazis did is they started a fire in the Reichstag building. They blamed the fire on their political opponents. And they said to the scared German people, surrender your political and economic power to us, and we'll prevent crises like this from happening.
Yeah.
When they are the ones that cause the crisis to.
That sounded mighty familiar, Pastor.
That's right. And so this is what's called crisis management. It's government loves a crisis,
Yeah.
and if they don't have one, they'll make one up. You see this mentality expressed in the fear of Paul Henry Charles Spock, all the way back, I think, in 1957, if I've got my date on this correct. And he was one of the progenitors of what today is called the European Union. And what does he say in this quote?
And again, we don't have to make all this up. We just can read what they write.
Exactly.
So here we go. We do not want another committee. We have too many already. What we want is a man of sufficient stature to hold the allegiance of all people and to lift us out of the economic morass into which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and be he God or devil, we will receive him.
That's a stunning quote.
Woo!
Because what he's saying is we have problems in this world where we're sinking. We're sinking into an economic morass. And if you send us the right person to solve the problem,
Wow.
then we will gleefully and happily and heartily follow such a person. Whether he's God or devil is immaterial to us.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're going to get their devil.
They're going to get exactly what they're asking for.
So this crisis mindset is preparing the way
Yeah.
for Satan's man of the hour, the Antichrist. Notice what the quintessential globalist George Soros said recently in an interview.
All right, quoting, what is inconceivable in normal times becomes not only possible, but actually happens. People are disoriented and scared.
See, he doesn't want normal times.
Right.
Because in normal times, people are content and they would never give up their freedom to an entity to solve a problem for them because there is no problem. So they don't want normal times. They want abnormal times. They want the new normal. And they want to usher people into a mentality where they're scared out of their minds.
Yeah.
And when they're afraid, they'll surrender power to somebody who promises to solve the problem for them.
That's the truth.
Maybe, Brother Jim, that's why the Bible, 365 times, that's once for every year when you think about it.
Every day of the year.
Every day of the year, excuse me. Every day of the year says, do not fear.
Whoa. Look at there.
365 times in the Bible we're commanded to fear not. And maybe God knew that this management crisis strategy would emerge in the last days.
Yeah.
Because if we're not afraid, we're not going to surrender our freedom to anybody.
Boy, that's right.
So we've quoted many times former chief of staff in the Obama administration, Rahm Emanuel. What did he say?
You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before.
So what he says is we as government love a crisis because when a crisis is implemented, the people will surrender their freedoms to us and it's an opportunity for government to grow.
Yep.
And we will take any existing crisis and milk it for all it's worth. And if we don't have a crisis, Brother Jim, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make one up.
Just create one out of thin air.
Now we have this list of United Nations globalism conferences. And if you look at this list, I don't know if we have time to read through the whole list, but it just touts one conference after another that the United Nations has had, touting some kind of crisis, a Chicken Little mentality.
Yeah.
The sky is falling.
Yeah.
There's an overpopulation crisis. No, there's not.
No.
All you got to do is fly across the country and look out the window.
That's true.
to see there's no overpopulation crisis.
True.
There's a human rights crisis, we're told. Women's rights crisis. Climate change crisis. And starvation crisis. Not that there aren't real issues that shouldn't be looked into, but the issue is always hyped beyond the facts. And the carrot that is always held out is world government. Mm-hmm. Just accept world government and we'll fix the problem for you. So basically it's this idea of selling fear. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, Brother Jim, do they have a crisis today? I thought they would take this one all the way to the end, but it's actually been replaced by another crisis in 2020. But before we get to that crisis, let's talk about the first crisis. Here is this slide entitled The Ultimate Crisis. This is a direct quote from King and Schneider, two globalists. And they say right there in their book that, well, what does the quote say?
Well, let's see. Let's see what they say. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, listen to that, new enemy to unite us, we came up with, that's created out of thin air, right?
That's right.
We came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill.
See, the Reichstag fire is only going to get you so far because that's a local crisis or a city crisis or, at best, a national crisis. To bring in world government, we've got to get the whole world to acquiesce political power to world government. So we need a global crisis. So they went to the drawing board and scratched their heads and said, what could we come up with? And they said, you know what, let's use the environment. Because if we can convince people there is a environmental crisis, the environment by definition governs everything. Mm-hmm. And if we can convince people via the environment that there is a global crisis, and we keep pounding that into their heads via propaganda, because if you repeat a lie long enough, people will believe it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hitler's media guy, Goebbels, was it? I'm pronouncing that right? Goebbels, something like that, said that. And basically what he said is, we need a global crisis, and if there's a global crisis, we can position ourselves to offer the global solution. The global solution is going to be one world government. So they came up with the whole idea of an environmental crisis. The whole thing, if you believe we're in an environmental crisis right now, that the ozone layer is disappearing, and the rainforest issue, and global warming, and global cooling, if you believe all of that propaganda, then you're exactly where the globalists want you. Because they want you to reach out to global governance to solve the crisis. And when you think about it, Brother Jim, the environment controls every area of a person's life. What they eat, where they work, what kind of gas they put in their car, what kind of hairspray, if any, that they use, shaving cream. I mean, everything can be micromanaged and regulated in the name of the environment. So they came up with the environment as a crisis. What do you think about that?
I tell you what I think about this is I read this slide and I'm listening to you. In the back of my mind, I'm hearing something I've never thought about before. Doctrines of devils. Doctrines of devils. Each one of these things is a doctrine of devils.
And that's 1 Timothy 4:1.
Isn't that interesting?
Satan has doctrines. Just like we in the Bible church have doctrines that we follow from the Bible, Satan has his own doctrines, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I think so.
And we have this statement here from Al Gore. This must have been just after he had or just before he had invented the internet.
Oh yes, that's
And
right.
he makes this statement in his book, Earth in the Balance. Don't take my word for it. It's right there, folks, on page 269 in the edition that I'm using. But what does he say there?
According to Al Gore, quote, "We must make the rescue of the environment the central organizing principle for civilization," close quote.
So this global crisis has to become the central organizing principle for the world, and they're using this, never let a crisis go to waste, as the auspices for global governance.
And it's made him very wealthy.
It sure has. That's a good point. Now, this is why they hate the Bible, because if you love the Bible, believe the Bible, in early Genesis, you won't be hoodwinked by this propaganda, because God says something in the Noahic covenant.
He sure does. Shall I read this?
Please.
Genesis 8:22. Now let's see if this doctrine of devil's idea
Yeah.
doesn't work, right? While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease.
So God, after the flood, describes 4 cycles that have nothing to do with human activity.
Isn't that interesting?
Seed time and harvest, summer and winter, and it's going to be summer or winter, and day and night, whether I drive an SUV or
That's
not.
right. That's right.
And they're right there in the mix. He mentions cold and heat. In other words, the earth is going to go through natural cycles of heating and cooling.
Yep.
So at one time in our lives, they were warning us about global warming.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, they were warning us about global cooling,
Yeah.
or the new ice age.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, they got smart and just called it climate change, because that's a broad enough umbrella term to cover everything.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that, gosh, we as Americans, we as capitalists, we as business people are destroying the environment.
Mm-hmm.
We're causing climate change. And God says the climate is going to change. It doesn't matter what people do.
He's in charge.
He's in charge. And did you know, Brother Jim, they had global warming during the time of the Vikings?
Yeah.
Did you know that?
I did.
And they cut that off the hockey stick graph.
Yeah.
You know, because they didn't want that to show up, because that won't fit the agenda.
Yeah.
And science, everybody's saying, follow the science. Science is politicized.
Yes. Oh boy.
Absolutely politicized. It's used to convince people of a global crisis so they will accept global government. And what I thought, Brother Jim, is they were going to ride that horse all the way into the barn.
Yes.
And I thought that until the year 2020, when all of a sudden, out of clear blue, another crisis comes. They're not going to give up the environmental crisis.
Oh, no.
But they've supplemented it or augmented it with crisis number 2, COVID-19.
Right.
I prefer to call it COVID-1984. Mm-hmm. And I want people to look at this here. This is the Rockefeller Foundation.
Oh, no.
It's called, we quoted Rockefeller earlier, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
It's called Scenarios for the Future Technology and International Development. And there's a section here called Lockstep Scenario Narratives. We're just going to read 2 sentences. You can find this online, by the way, and read it for yourself. 2 sentences. And I want people to understand something, that this was written, look at the date, it was written in 2010.
Oh, wait a minute. 2010?
Yeah. 2010, long before the 2020 COVID-1984 crisis hit. And this is what these folks, these globalists, said.
All right, here it goes. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks.
What?
From the mandatory wearing of face masks
2010.
to body temperature checks.
What?
Body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified.
So they were talking about face masks and body temperature checks at entrances in 2010.
11 years ago.
Yes, and
11 years ago.
I thought when these things hit, these were new innovations till I read this
Wow.
in this Rockefeller Foundation
Well, there you go.
lockstep report. In other words, folks, we've been played like a fiddle.
Boy, is that the truth.
We've been absolutely played. Now, we're recording this, June the 4th, 2021. There's been a bunch of email issues that have come out concerning Fauci.
Yes.
And the things that he knew without us knowing that he knew what he knew. And it fits in exactly with what we're saying. I mean, this whole COVID 1984 issue has been planned. It came out of it's a biological weapon that was unleashed. You know, they're blaming it on bats. I was listening to someone earlier today, and they were saying how ludicrous it is to believe that this came from bats when there's no bat caves in Wuhan where this came from. Mm-hmm. Now, isn't that a slight problem to the thesis that they've been feeding us? It came out of this high-level lab, and it was pushed through the CHICOMs, the CCP virus, and WHO, the World Health Organization, was involved in all of this. And the whole thing it's a manufactured disease. Yeah. It's a manufactured crisis to get us to acquiesce to control over our lives.
Exactly.
And that's how to understand COVID-19. So you put that together with climate change, and now not just one horse are riding into the barn, it's two horses. Mm-hmm. And the world's in a state of panic. Mm-hmm. And George Soros said when people are panicked and it's not normal, they submit. They surrender. And certainly that's happened, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And people kind of got upset when we sort of somewhat tongue-in-cheek used the term plandemic.
Plandemic, yeah.
Well, we just read an article from 11 years ago that just described exactly what we've been dealing with.
Exactly. And then came along Event 201. You notice the zero looks like a globe. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
And when you study Event 201 that took place through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in New York City in December of 2019, they war gamed the whole thing.
Yeah.
Everything we went through in 2020 and what we're going through now was war gamed in advance in this global pandemic exercise. And their goal is to reset the planet. Mm-hmm. In fact, here's Time Magazine, The Great Reset, and look at how the planet is being reconstructed. What form is it being reconstructed into? Against nationalism and in favor of one worldism, because we need a global government to solve this global problem. And things started to emerge like this World Economic Forum COVID wheel. Have you seen this?
No.
I don't know if you've spent any time on this, but as you go to these links, it takes you to hyperlinks. And then you go to hyperlinks and there's links beyond that and links beyond that. So this whole thing, this is not somebody's garage sale website that they threw together at the last minute. This thing is obviously well designed, and it's what the world is supposed to look like in the post-COVID-19 environment. There's stuff about law, global governance, food. So what's happening is our planet, is being reset.
Wow.
And you have Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, who is just very bold in his assertions of what their intention is through all of this. What does he say in this quote?
I'm just not sure bold is strong enough a term.
Yeah.
Here's what he says. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world.
They love that word, reimagine.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And does this not remind us of what John Lennon sung of in his song Imagine?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He says, imagine a time there'll be no countries. In other words, we're going to erase the nation-state doctrine that God established at Babel. Yeah. There's going to be no religion, no heaven or no hell. In other words, God doesn't exist.
Right.
It's like this tower that Josephus said Nimrod was building to exclude the possibility of a flood. Everyone living for today, there's no thought of eternity. The world is one, and then, of course, no possessions. Which is funny because he died a millionaire several
Yeah,
times over.
yes.
And then you brought up earlier, Al Gore has made himself filthy rich
Yeah.
through all of this global warming stuff. And by the way, that's how it always works, folks, in communism. The haves and the have-nots, which they say they're going to erase, those accelerate. The world lives in enslavement, and the people running the system, a handful of them, an oligarchy, live in splendor.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's comical that Lennon is singing a song about no possessions. What else does Schwab say here?
All right, quoting again, to achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions.
And notice what he says here in this quote. This is stunning here.
Yeah, this kind of looks like John Lennon's song, doesn't it? Y'all own nothing and you'll be happy about it.
Yeah, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Isn't that communism? Or Marxism? But it's just going to be implemented on a worldwide scale.
Sorry, I threw a little Texan in there, didn't
Please.
I? That wasn't y'all, it was you will. You
will.
Ewan's own nothing.
Yeah. Now, Justin Trudeau, by the way, Justin Trudeau is strongly rumored to be the love child of Fidel Castro.
Is that right?
Have you ever looked at some pictures of Justin Trudeau next to Fidel Castro? It's stunning, and I know I'm getting a little bit into some conspiracy theories here, but just be a Berean and search that one out. I just offer that as a suggestion.
I thought you were going to say he was a nut.
Well, he is. What does he say here?
He says this pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
You know, what fascinates me is they all use the same language.
Exactly.
You know, reset, reimagine.
They're programmed.
It's like they're all, as we say in the church circles, singing off the same song sheet.
Yeah. Brainwashed.
So, you know, they're all in on it.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is COVID 1984, I think, has done far more than global warming could have ever done in terms of destroying the freedom of the average citizen in the United States.
Well, you don't see people out there giving up their SUVs very much. I see SUVs everywhere. But you know something I still see? I see face masks everywhere.
Yeah. And social distancing.
And social distancing everywhere.
And if you sit down next to someone in the airport, as I've done, a private citizen, they'll give you a good tongue lashing because you're not social distancing.
Yeah.
Now, this is a quote from one of my favorite Supreme Court justices. Samuel Alito gave a speech recently to the Federalist Society, a conservative group. And what does he say here?
The pandemic has resulted in previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty. It's an indisputable statement of fact that we have never before seen restrictions as severe, extensive, and prolonged as those experienced for most of 2020.
And into 2021.
And here we are in 2021, yeah.
And what they really want to do, Brother Jim, is they want to bring in these COVID-19 immunity passports.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
There's a picture of the passport. Here's another slide. COVID-19 immunity passports. And a voice that people need to be paying attention to right now is the voice of Naomi Wolf.
Yeah.
I find Naomi Wolf very, very interesting. For one thing, she's not a conservative.
Not by any means.
She actually was an advisor to the Clinton administration, so she's no Republican, she's no conservative. She's actually a liberal Democrat. And she is the one that's screaming her head off about the fact that COVID-19 passports will spell the end, her quote, we'll see it in a minute, the end of human liberty.
Yeah.
She also is the head of a tech firm, so she has the technological understanding of things. So you're dealing with a liberal and a tech expert screaming her head off every chance she gets about what these COVID-19 immunity passports are going to do for human freedom. And what does she say here in this quote?
Quoting, the vaccine passports is literally the end of human liberty in the West if this plan unfolds as planned. Once this rolls out, you don't have a choice about being part of the system. It has the power to turn off your life or turn on your life. It geolocates you everywhere you go.
Wow.
Your credit history can be included. All of your medical history can be included. It would be the end of civil society.
I hope people see this language here. End of civil society. End of human liberty in the West as it is known.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this COVID-19 is pushed and manufactured. I'm not saying it's not a real virus, and it does kill people. But the fact of the matter is, it's like a bad flu season.
Mm-hmm.
It's notice how the flu's disappeared?
Yeah.
Nobody cares about the flu anymore.
Right.
It's all about COVID-19. It's like a bad flu season. It's not the crisis everybody's making it into. And even if it were, it's made up. It came out of a high-level lab. Didn't come out of bat soup or whatever it is they're telling us it came out of. Mm-hmm. And the end game is these immunity passports, which Naomi Wolf says technologically will be the end of freedom because you'll be tracked and monitored and data mined. What does she say? Geolocated.
Yeah.
Your whole life.
Mm-hmm. And
this is coming from a Democrat.
Yeah.
So she's not, biased, I don't think. And
we better listen.
She expresses in some of these quotes regrets that she ever voted for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. She said, if I had known Biden was going to, put the pedal to the metal on this like he has, I'm not in favor of totalitarianism. And she is an outspoken critic she lives in New York. I'm not sure if she's still there, but within the last month or so, she lived in New York. And she's a big critic of Cuomo and the Democrats there that are pushing these immunity passports.
Yeah, I've heard her actually say those things.
Yes, and of course they always take her off Facebook, take her off YouTube, so you can track this down. But here's the actual quote from her. Let's go here to letter D, or number 4, and this has to do with technology. What I believe, Brother Jim, is the only difference between Adolf Hitler and today is one word: technology. Mm-hmm. I believe that if Hitler had at his fingertips the technology that we now possess, he very well could have pulled off his global Third Reich.
Sure.
And one of the things to understand about Satan is he is a created being. You see that in Ezekiel 28, verse 13, where it says, on the day you were created, speaking of Satan. Mm-hmm. And then in verse 15, it says, from the day you were created.
Right.
So Satan is not like God in the sense that he doesn't have the incommunicable attributes of God. He doesn't have omniscience. He doesn't have omnipotence.
Right.
He doesn't have omnipresence. And so what he has always wanted to be is like God. Mm-hmm. In fact, it says that. We'll see it later in Isaiah 14, verse 14. He wants to be like God.
Right.
So how does a finite being become like God when he can't be everywhere at once? How does he control everything? Well, he has a system in place where he's able to monitor everybody and track everybody from cradle to grave. And that really is the source behind this one world technological system that Satan is wanting to bring in. In fact, can you read Revelation 13, just verse 16, if you don't mind?
All right, Revelation 13:16. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead.
And then verse 17, he says it provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark. So notice the word all. Mm-hmm. Notice the coupling of opposites, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. It's a prophesied technological system of some kind that will control every single human being on planet Earth. And my point is, technology has finally caught up, allowing this system to come into place.
Right.
So it's hard to talk about the New World Order without understanding it has to come into existence via the right technological climate. So notice this headline here. Do you mind just reading the headline there? Or in the part at the bottom, if you don't mind.
Okay, the headline says, "New technology refuses entrance to shops if you're not wearing a face mask." And here's the type below. "A new technology being used in shops in Thailand and other countries to enforce coronavirus restrictions conducts a face scan to check if the customer is wearing a mask and refuses entry if they don't have one."
So you don't have your mask on. The technology is now in place to shut the doors and not allow you to enter. I mean, isn't that a preparatory
Well, yeah.
for you can't buy or sell without the mark? I mean, the mark of the beast system is not just going to instantaneously appear. The stage has to be set technologically. The psychology has to be in place, and we're seeing it, aren't we?
Well, we already have stores all over the place that have had signs out saying "No mask, no entry."
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, and one of the big things to understand is cashless. They want to move us in a cashless direction.
Right.
Now, why is that? Well, Brother Jim, I just bought a book electronically, I think on Amazon. Not that I'm a big Amazon fan, but I bought the book, and all of a sudden in my inbox, I started getting notifications saying, well, if you like this book, then you'd like this one, and this one, and this one. And you know what? They're right. I do like all of those books. Now, how would they know that? Well, the computer in a nanosecond can run a profile on me.
Right.
As long as I'm purchasing things digitally.
Right.
Now, if I was purchasing things through cash, they couldn't run that profile on me.
That's true.
So how can they know what your beliefs are, what your philosophies are, whether you're pro-New World Order, anti-New World Order, unless they can first digitize buying habits and patterns?
Yeah.
And so that's why cash is being phased out and digitized transactions are becoming normal.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is right out of the book of Revelation.
Yes.
Chapter 13, verses 16 and following. So we have the Bank of America CEO coming out and saying, we want a cashless society. And how about this one here, this tweet? This is from BBC News about Amazon. What does that say?
Amazon's new payment system lets people pay using their palm.
And it says Amazon One Palm Scanner launch for secure payments. Here's another headline that says Wisconsin company to implant microchips in employees. Here's another headline that says Swedish commuters can use futuristic microchip hand implant. Now,
hand implant. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And don't get us wrong, folks. We're not saying this is the mark of the beast yet.
No.
Because we're not in the tribulation period.
Right.
And we don't have the beast yet. But it's certainly preparatory. It's the It's the mystery of lawlessness is already at work.
That's right, exactly.
The spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world.
Stage setting.
Stage setting, and the chess match, and all of those analogized things that we used. Let's do this quote, and then we'll call it a day in just a second, because we have so much material and we don't want to rush through it. I think we're going to divide this into 2 shows. But in addition to Naomi Wolf, here is a second person that you should be paying attention to right now. Her name is Catherine Austin Fitts. And this is an interview that she did in August 2020. I believe her title is Former Assistant to the HUD Director, I want to say in the Bush administration, if I have that right. And she also is like Naomi Wolf, is an outspoken critic of this technology that's being pushed and how it will inevitably lead to the deterioration of freedom. And what does she say here?
All right, the article here, it says Planet Lockdown Film Interview mid-August 2020. The technocracy that they are pushing towards is what is called transhumanism. Essentially what you do...
Can I stop you right there?
Yes.
Klaus Schwab calls transhumanism in his own book the fourth industrial revolution.
Wow.
So this marriage between machines and man, where all of a sudden the machine starts to sort of exercise power over a person. That's what's called transhumanism.
So cyborgs.
And that's the fourth industrial revolution. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's all right. It reminds me of some movies that Arnold Schwarzenegger made.
Well, that's a whole other subject of movies.
Yes.
Because I think they've been planting these ideas in our minds a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Via movies, right down to diseases. If you go back to, I forgot the series, it's with the kid that was in the Breakfast Club. What's that series called? The Dead Zone.
Oh,
the
Dead
Dead
Zone,
Zone series. There's some clips of him almost walking out a scenario that we see today in COVID-19, and how a disease came and how they had to submit to controls in the midst of the crisis. But anyway, sorry to interrupt you. I'm talking too much.
That's all right.
What is Catherine Austin?
Okay, so we were talking about transhumanism here. Essentially, what you do is you use injections to inject materials into the body that create the equivalent of an operating system and a receiver. And you can literally hook everybody up to the cloud. The Bible calls it the mark of the beast. But you are basically talking about being able to digitally identify and track people in connection with their financial transactions. So it is a world of zero privacy. You are now talking about a system where every central bank in the world can shut you off individually from transacting if they do not like the way you're behaving.
Wow. And read the next page if you can.
Okay, there's more. That was enough. Here's more. Many people are familiar with the social credit system in China. It is very similar.
Now we've covered that.
Yes.
Where,
Yes.
If your behavior isn't right, suddenly your opportunities in life dry up.
Yes.
You can't get the right loan from the right bank. You can't get your kids into the right school.
Yep.
Your traveling privileges disappear.
Yeah.
Passport privileges disappear. Your life shrinks almost like to an electronic concentration camp. Something that could not happen without technology. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. It is very similar, she says. If you install the smart grid in their car, their community, and now literally in their body, you have got 24/7 surveillance.
Now, in the body, maybe that's the reason why they're so high on vaccinating everybody.
Gee, I wonder.
Maybe they want to put something in our body. Anyway.
And if people do not do what you say and behave the way you want, they can and will shut off their money. And they will also have spatial control. If they say you cannot travel more than 5 miles, that is it, because you are in a complete digital control system, and it is controlled by the central bankers through the money.
So the goal is to put something in your body. So therefore, if your behavior is politically incorrect, if you like the wrong Facebook page, or go to the wrong church, or listen to the wrong sermon, then suddenly your financial life dries up. Something that couldn't happen if you're walking around with a wad of cash.
Yeah.
But now that we're all cashless, it's this idea of global control. I mean, it's right out of the book of Revelation.
So we've taken the whole idea of ankle trackers on criminals,
Yes.
and we've transitioned this into everybody having an implanted tracker.
And all we've done is turned law-abiding citizens into non-law-abiding citizens.
Yeah.
And we're criminalizing ordinary people that normally would have no run-ins with the law.
Well, everyone's a potential criminal.
Yes.
Right?
And the mystery of lawlessness is already at work.
Wow.
So this is all stage setting. Elite opinion, education, crisis management, technology. We'll pick it up next week with border indifference. Let me just spend a couple of seconds here responding to some comments or questions that came in. One person says, I watched the World Economic Forum with Schwab and others. They seem earnest to take care of poverty. Is this the type of deception that people will buy into? Yes, because what did Judas say? When, what was it, Mary?
Yeah.
Who broke the vase and poured the expensive oil on Christ.
What a waste!
This should have been given to the poor. And John 12, verses 1 through 8 says Judas had no interest in the poor.
Not a bit.
What he was interested in is keeping the money in the money purse so he could keep embezzling.
Yeah.
So not everybody that claims to be a crusader for the poor really cares about the poor. You know, Fidel Castro claimed to be a great man of the people.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As did Adolf Hitler. And Hugo Chavez and probably every other dictator in world history.
Guevara,
Here's someone that says the Pope has called for a new green religion.
That figures.
Here's another one that says, now the government setting up for after the rapture by UFOs. That's a great topic that we'll have to look into at some point. Another person says, how many have a pastor who will cover this material? Not many, tragically. Thank you guys for giving us an understanding and hope. And in our second show together next week, we're going to be giving you a lot of hope. So don't get too despondent.
No.
That's been one of the great perplexities of my life, Brother Jim, is as these things are happening, the pulpit is increasingly silent.
Yeah.
And it should be the opposite, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Another person says, who will govern this global government before the Antichrist? Or do we think this will bring in the Antichrist before it comes to fullness? I would think the system is largely going to be in place and the Antichrist will show up and just kind of flick the switch.
Right. Yeah.
Another person says, don't worry, don't fret, don't be anxious, look for Jesus, he is coming. Thank you, Andy and Jim. Yes, he is coming, and we're going to show you a lot of optimism in our next show together. And someone else, this is the last comment, says, I recently heard that Russia within a month will no longer recognize or use the U.S. dollar. Have you heard anything regarding this? The source is new to me, and he spouts his opinion regarding Bible prophecy. It's clear he's wrong. I guess he's wrong in some prophetic areas. His claim is that Trump is the Antichrist.
Oops.
So I'm not totally convinced that this information regarding the U.S. dollar may be correct. Looking for confirmation. I haven't heard anything on the dollar. It wouldn't surprise me if it was true. Obviously, I don't think Trump is the Antichrist because the Antichrist is a one-worlder. Trump was a nationalist. And the Antichrist is called the man of lawlessness.
Yeah.
Trump ran on law and order.
Yeah, he did. That's right.
And the Antichrist is going to come out of Europe. Trump came out of the United States. And so they did this with Reagan, too. They tried to make Reagan the Antichrist. And almost everybody in world history is called the Antichrist. You know, Bill Clinton came along. He couldn't be the Antichrist, though, because it says the Antichrist won't be a lover of women.
I knew you were going there.
And so Clinton didn't fit that bill.
No, he didn't.
Pardon the expression. So we'll stop at this point. We're going to pick it up right where we left off next week as we fill in these details about global government. Not just past, present, but also future. And I promise you, you're going to leave these sessions a flaming optimist because God is in control. We'll see you next time. God bless you.
God bless.